afterwards, right?
Yep,
Yes.
when you send the thank yous. Yep.
And yeah.
Good luck, everyone.
Good luck. Thank you.
Just give me a second. I'm just making this live on YouTube. It's just taking.
It does say live though, Rohit, on the screen.
It's just like loading at my end, so I'm just, or maybe I can just start. Maybe I can just start. So I made the session live. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's session on EV. This session is brought to you by the team at India's leading automotive events, Commercial Vehicle Forum, Two-Wheeler Forum, and Passenger Vehicle Forum, or as we are more popularly known, CVF, TWF, and PVF. My name is Rohit Devan, and I'm the event director for these forums. So before we begin today's session, I wanted to let you know about the agenda. So first, we will kick off the proceedings of the live session with a brief introduction, wherein I will introduce the speakers and the partner. Post the introduction, there will be a brief presentation by Mr. Andre Kuhn, who is a senior product manager at Here Technologies. Once the presentation is concluded, I will be introducing the speakers and the moderator for today's session. Our moderator will then give a quick overview of the topic, and then we will initiate the moderated discussion, which will last around 50 to 60 minutes. We will also devote 2-3 minutes at various strategic points during the discussion to run few polls to obtain your feedback. And post the completion of the discussion and the polls, we will take few questions from the audience and towards the end of the session in the Q&A segment. Your active participation is incredibly important to make this session a success. Right now, we have everybody in listen only mode. So here is how you can interact with us. You can ask us questions. At the bottom of the screen, you will see a control panel with a Q&A box. So please feel free to share your questions in the Q&A box. And you can even choose to upvote these questions, which will help us in addressing the most burning topics. We will take your questions in the Q&A segment at the end of the session. We also invite you to share your insights in the poll questions that we will be flashing on your screen at regular intervals. Do note that we also have this session streaming live on YouTube, and anybody who has registered for the session will be also receiving a recording and the presentation post the completion of the session. Apart from that, I also request you to share your insights in the feedback form that will open as soon as you exit the session. If there is something you're interested in learning more about the session, do feel free to reach out to us. I wanted to take this time to especially thank our partner Here Technologies for supporting this session. Here is a location data and technology platform which moves people, businesses, and cities forward by harnessing the power of location. By leveraging their open platform, they empower their customers to achieve better outcomes from helping a city manage its infrastructure or a business optimize its assets to guiding drivers to the destination safely. To learn more about Here, you can visit here.com. And now to shed more light on Here Technologies and some of its interesting innovations, I would like to invite Mr. Andre Kuhn, Senior Product Manager at Here Technologies. Mr. Kuhn is a certified product management specialist for location-based services and has worked with front-end and back-end products as well as automotive projects at Here Technologies and United Navigation for more than 14 years. He headed the development and product management of the globally available navigations app, Nokia Navigation and Here Drive Plus, managed the Here EV routing offering, and is the responsible person for Here connected parking and EV POI products. He will talk about the importance of the role of location in the journey towards EV. Over to you, Andre.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rohit. Let me share my screen. And it was a great introduction. So Is everything live? Just as usual, the standard confirmation. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So then thanks to all for joining. In the next few minutes, so that's about 10 to 15 minutes, I will share with you some ideas on how location and the role of location, which is what it is playing, and how it can have a big impact to your business, and why probably here location data and our platform is different from what you might be using today and what might be helping you. So today, taking a look at our world, we see that climate change is getting a more and more important topic, and a lot of governments are pushing for sustainability, but sustainable development goals are really difficult to reach sometimes. Concrete commitments are expected in decarbonization efforts, also in the EU, for example, by actually reducing the target temperature or the raise of the target of the temperature in a certain amount of years. So, and electrical vehicles are considered very important factors in these efforts. But it goes even beyond thinking of smart cities or handling on-demand economy in a more sustainable way. So delivery is getting up and running, and actually a lot of more cars or delivery trucks are in the cities. Smart cities are trying to reduce their electricity footprint. There's a few things what we can talk about. You will see that a little bit later. But let's take a quite quick look at the mobility and EVs in APAC. So the installation base of electric vehicles is on the rise in APAC. So what you see, there's a few things. In general, mobility concept, so going away from individual mobility with a car, there's more and more people who like those. So the enthusiasm actually increases. You see that here in Singapore, India, and UAE, China, and Saudi Arabia. So the information, by the way, is coming from the Automotive Disruption Radar survey, which was done recently. It was actually tracking 26 indicators in 18 global markets, and it's done regularly. You see the differences. So the green one was the one from 2 years ago, and orange is as of today. Additionally, what you see as well is a growing interest in electric vehicles in general in the sales. 50% of potential car buyers are saying now they're considering a battery EV. Last year, it was only 40. And therefore, also in bigger cities like Singapore, mobility concepts are getting more and more enthusiastic answers. Going also to another part, which is very important in APAC, is the overall raise of two-wheelers. So actually the expected shipment is growing like hell. So per year, the annual growth rate is expected to be 21%. And that means you have a big impact on a lot of areas, like including supply chain, including governmental funds or programs to actually invest more into EV. Also, the people behavior change. So overall, you have a big impact. A lot of well, it's not only that new cars or a new method of transportation is on the streets. Actually, the impact is going beyond. So for those, for example, the powertrains need to be produced. You need to get new parts in all the areas of the world. So even logistics has a big impact. And as such, location services are playing a big role and are evolving towards seamless convergence across industry collaborations, and use case orchestration in a cloud platform environment will definitely be a key to unlocking the value of the data. Take a look at those. So there's a few items which could play a role. If we take a look at smart cities, so in Barcelona, actually sensors were placed in trash cans or whatsoever. When they are full, that they get emptied to reduce the amount of garbage trucks going around the city when it's not necessary, to reduce the carbon footprint. So then precision agriculture is getting in to actually get more out of the current production areas which are available. So centimeter accuracy is quite normal for automated farming. And if you think about autonomous driving or improved public transit planning, traffic management, and all of those has a big impact on climate change, but all require location, and all is now connected also to electric vehicles. Taking a look at the electric vehicle markets, we have actually 4 segments which we now structured out. One is the infrastructure providers, and they have a few EV challenges. One is in general understanding the required demand today, and what would be the need in the future, so that they can plan the according investments. Because in some cases you can't simply ramp up fast charging stations in a week. It takes a bit longer. So what is the best placement of the charging stations? Because you want to invest wisely. Actually, if you need to make money, of course, they need to be positioned at the correct area. And also, if you do that properly, you have the exact right amount of charging points in the network, what is required to actually support electric vehicles. Also, the big question is if there's an impact on energy provisioning and the grid. So the assumption was that if too many people charge, suddenly there's an impact on the grid and power supply can get unstable. So a lot of projects are currently now testing those and trying that out. If we move forward and taking a look at the next segment, so I will not read that out. You will be able to read all the details afterwards in the shared presentation. So let me move on to the mobility providers. So in general, what is the electric vehicle for an urban mobility? So they have different problems. So it's about what happens for fleet management, taxis, and so on. What happens during shifts if consumption of the car changed and suddenly you have a reduced range? So you need help to actually support these people in fulfilling their duty. Then charging stations are not always available. At the moment, people are charging at the station, leaving their car there, at least where I'm living, without problems for 16 hours. That's not only charging, but blocking everyone else from charging. Job allocation is also depending on battery status. Can I use the vehicle in the delivery area? And then you have, of course, different charging station compatibility standards. So it needs to meet your car's needs. So as such, range anxiety still comes up. Difficulty of charging is actually a big part of the users. And just think about that, especially during peak times in the city, more stop and go than usual. Battery consumption is different, weather changes, you need to use the AC to survive and so on. And suddenly your range get reduced by whatever, 100 miles, could be the case. So all of that needs to be taken into account. And in the moment, people simply don't know how to deal with it, and there's no end-to-end solution in the market. For technology and solution providers, that is exactly what we talked about, is about simplified usage of the EV. So think about mobility, so the integrated application would try to help you, and they try to actually get you finding charging stations. They try to actually tell you if a charging station is available, it's compatible with your car. You can even go there and charge it, but the most important thing is also pay for it. So at the moment, the segmentation is huge, and it's pretty hard to find one solution which lets you let's say, roam around easily. So additionally, the data sets which need to be combined are pretty siloed at the moment and not connected. Think about the CPOs who have actually their location data, the MSPs, which have then payment data and usage data. You have the electric vehicle OEMs who know when cars have problems. You have the drivers driving around, actually then having the location data, and you can theoretically read out what you do where. But that is actually a big item. You need to actually aggregate all that data, make sense out of that, and put that together. So it's a big complexity where people struggle with. So another one is, in general, the user experience, which is not ideal. At the moment, parking an EV, for example, is always a separate function. But at the end, if you want to go by car, you don't care about that. You simply want to reach your destination. So suddenly, a task you don't want to focus on becomes or has a very important role in your day-to-day business. But with the right user experience and connection of the correct data, we can do that much more easy. We can actually recommend, we can simplify and move on. Also, the data itself is normally inaccurate and provides problems and lets actually range anxiety rise again. For government and cities authorities, there's emission goals. There's also a question of provisioning of infrastructure. And for those, they need to understand supply and demand. They need to know what they want to support where, and data privacy and security for all people in the whole process is also very important, because especially location data location data could be used to really identify locations, things you do on a daily basis. So you need to have a mechanism to somehow merge the data, provide the data in a neutral way. And here, with the previous challenges, we think that, well, Here Technologies is able to orchestrate that solution with the Here platform. And from Location Data Play, we provide different components. So to also fulfill the need, demand, and supply, let it be from data analytics, enrichments, mapping, visualization, but also privacy. And as briefly mentioned before, there's a seamless access to enterprise-grade location data in a standardized format on the Here platform as well. So you can, even if you just a mobility service provider, you have nothing to do with maps, you can actually get the map, you can make sense out of your location data. You can use services like traffic, routing, hazard warnings, or road signs, whatever is required, POI data to see where certain demand comes up and why. And these analyses are supported by our platform. Just to make sure, very quickly, I will not read to those. Here's a bit of a list of capabilities, what you could do in certain areas like mapping, visualization, analytics, development in a quite normal way. But the important thing is that we also offer the capabilities of providing neutral storage functionality. And that is, for example, used in Europe for safety features. So all cars are providing safety relevant safety relevant sensor data, which is also personal, but all of that is joined together in a platform so that people can make use out of that and make the data more safe. And the same functionality we can also provide for EV data. Taking a look for EV specific, what do we have? Everything starts at the moment. If we take a look at the car, the biggest change is charging. So it starts with the charging stations. So very quickly to go in some of the solutions we have, we support around 322 EV stations globally. That's more than 500,000 EVSEs. So here we can already help you or help customers and users to find the correct charging spot, which is compatible with your car. But we also can help to actually fight range anxiety. We have sophisticated routing solutions which take even into account personalized behaviors like driving styles or preferred routes or weather or elevation. So all of those, including age of the battery, can be actually taken into account to also model the charging curves properly for predicting the range you have. I did a few examples in Mumbai, and since Mumbai is very busy, you don't see too much of a difference. So range on route is what we call a functionality to see how far can you go on a route. Visualization is can be done on your side. But as an example, you can take a look how far can you go with actually your charge from a specific point at different point of times. And I simply took a look at Mumbai, 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. You see a clear difference simply caused by traffic. On other areas, it is much more, there's much more significant changes, but I thought using as an example from your area, so where we are currently presenting, makes more sense. So you can check reachability, you can actually generate easily low energy warnings and recovery scenario triggering. If we go further and you have longer routes and you require charging in between, the question is always, what is the best way? In the past, routes have been calculated, stations have been used, searched along the route and found, and that is not good. It doesn't take into account charging time, which still have a significant impact on your travel time. It doesn't take into account that sometimes a detour is faster due to different charging speeds, and that's what we can do here. So we calculate a route which is optimized over time, including the charging time. So here you see, for example, a simple elevation plot and charging spot in the middle. So I started with the very lowest charge. Here, the expectation is that we charge up to 75% to reach the destination with a predefined energy level. So you could also define the energy level to actually travel on. So all of that is easily integratable into the systems. And for those, as stated before, we can actually make sure that the range insurance is given. You can maximize the range. We have actually OEMs taking the data in to simply optimizing the drivetrain to reduce consumptions and optimize for the longest range possible. As a reference, a part of that, we had a customer on two-wheeler side which used actually our SDK for location mapping. They used the SDK for their drivers to support turn by turn. They didn't need to care about it, but with the data we provide, they could use their, for example, delivery much easier. The usability was much finer and people were more happy. And they could also, they didn't get stranded. So they could plan the routes accordingly and all the deliveries, taking into account battery stage, range prediction, everything which is needed. So as a summary, I would say with the platform from here and the challenges, we provide solutions, or you can provide solutions for sustainable journeys. And an important item of that is actually the localized location data, where you actually need to understand also map data and how to deal with it. It's also the importance that you have a platform where you have a unified access to all the data and merge that together, because otherwise you will not be able to get that complexity well enough together. And with all of that, you can build smart and sustainable mobility solutions. That was 60 minutes, so 1 minute over. I hope that is still fine. Thanks a lot. And therefore, I would say back to Rohit or Q&A.
Thanks. So Andre, I'm gonna share my screen now. So if you can stop the share. So Andre, back. I hope my screen is visible now.
Working fine.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for the insightful presentation, Andre. We will now move on to the panel discussion because we will address the questions at the end. So I would like to briefly introduce our expert speaker group. So please join me in welcoming first Mr. Abhilek Kumar, who is Director and Head of Business Development, India and South Asia at Uber. Abhilek has over 15 years of professional experience across management consulting and a diverse set of functional roles across multiple tech companies. In fact, he has previously worked with the likes of Flipkart, Cast24, Reliance Entertainment, Yatra, McKinsey, and Infosys. In terms of his education, he's an MBA from Darden School of Business and BTech plus MTech from IIT Kharagpur. Next, we have Mr. Andre Iodake, who is Senior Global Manager, Automotive Solutions at Here Technologies. He's currently leading strategy and business development for automated and assisted driving globally for the organization. In his role, Mr. Iodake is working with automotive companies and tier ones to enhance driving experiences by harnessing the power of location data and location-based services. His background is in product strategy, advanced product planning, connected services, and e-mobility. He has previously worked for Jaguar Land Rover and Kia Motors as well. In terms of his education, he has graduated in a leadership program for Stanford Graduate School of Business and has an MBA from Aarhus School of Business, Denmark. Our third speaker for the session is Ms. Prerna Chaturvedi, who is an experienced military aviator with a very interesting and diverse background. She is an international business development professional and entrepreneur with 25 years of experience across aerospace and defense. Besides, she has a decade of hands-on experience of flying choppers in terrains ranging from glaciers to deserts. She has been at the helm of mission control for many search and rescue operations, including earthquake, flood relief, warhead trials, Operation Vijay, amongst others. She is also among the few women CEOs to lead an automobile OEM in India and is currently the CEO at Evolet, a leading electric vehicle OEM. Our next speaker for the session is Mr. Irfan Khan, founder and CEO of eBikeGo, a Startup of the Year winner in 2019, and which is today a leading player electrifying India with smart electric vehicles that power the last mile delivery ecosystem in India. Irfan is among one of the leading thought leaders for EV adoption and is someone who has paved the path for what has now become the EV revolution and the future of mobility in India. Our next speaker for the day is Mr. Akash Gupta, who is the co-founder and CEO of Zip Electric. Akash is on a mission to electrify last mile deliveries for masses and make India pollution free. In fact, what started as an experiment 2 years back with EVs is now over a $1 million ARR business. Akash is an alumnus of the Institute of Management Technology, Ghaziabad, and has worked with the likes of Airtel, Snapdeal, and MobiKwik in the past. Our final panelist for the session is Mr. Sandeep Bangia, who is the head of EV, home automation, and ESCO business at Tata Power. He's an electrical engineer with over 24 years of experience and an MBA from Narsi Monji. He has worked in consumer durables and telecom for Carrier Aircon, Tata Teleservices, Reliance Communication, and Idea Cellular in the past. Sandeep combines his understanding of emerging technologies and digital platforms, his experience in telecom and mobility space, and his passion towards clean mobility to drive innovative solutions in the EV charging ecosystem. And finally, please join me in welcoming your moderator for the day, Mr. Harshvardhan Sharma, who leads automotive retail consulting practice at Nomura. In the past, he has worked across multiple sectors, including automotive, luxury goods, FMCG, e-commerce, and financial services. And within these sectors, his focus has been on customer experience, channel management, entry and growth strategy, organizational turnaround, and performance improvement. He has worked across multiple geographies and led large-scale global engagements spanning APAC, AU, ANZ, and MEA regions. He has also worked in the past at automotive OEMs, Toyota and Honda in various roles. He holds an MBA from IIM Shillong and is a mechanical engineer from Punjab Technical University. Over to you, Harsh, to take this forward.
Thank you so much, Rohit, for the introduction, and a very warm welcome to all the panelists and to the audiences. It's great having you all here. So before we delve into the discussion, just to set the cadence, we have quite an interesting topic today, which will be around electric vehicle adoption. We'll be covering aspects of technology, commercials, customer centricity, CX, etc., all those elements. While the queries will be directed at a broad level, do feel free to add your point of view as panelists from your own organization's point of view over there. So with that, let me kick off the session by asking or talking a little bit about the adoption of electric vehicles per se. So all of us would agree that electric vehicles, at least in the Indian ecosystem, there's been a lot of noise, a lot of communication. Electric vehicles are going to take over. It's going to be future of mobility. However, and there's been a lot of government mention for a general buzz. But when it comes to specifics, there still remains ambiguity and anxiety, ultimately impacting adoption. So just taking the view of the panel here on how some of these adoption challenges can be countered, and in your own initiatives in various organizations, how have you seen this pan out? So let me just begin with Abhilek. Abhilek at Uber, I'm sure mobility per se and electric mobility is something which you would want the fleet to adopt. Hopefully, because green is going forward, it's quite certain. Therefore, what's Uber's view, and how are we tackling adoption challenges at Uber? Over to you, please.
So at Uber, I would say the adoption is something that is like it's based on multiple factors, if I have to put it that way. There are multiple parts of the ecosystem that need to come in place for the adoption at scale within the drivers to happen. So one is the vehicle itself. What is the pricing of it with a comparable vehicle? The second is the whole financing ecosystem, because that feeds into enabling the drivers to go ahead and buy. Third is what I would call is the whole, I would say, operating factors like range anxiety and uh, any other enabling factors that exists. Fourth, I would say, is your whole charging or the swapping infrastructure, because drivers don't buy just for driving, but they also buy it for their own use. So, for example, even if you are buying in the city, and even if the infra exists to some reasonable level within the city, it won't work because they may travel intercity also. So, and then there is one more, which is the secondary market. How strong is the secondary market? Because once the vehicle becomes old to a certain degree, they would want a market where they can go and sell it. All of these need to come together at scale for proper adoption to happen. In India, there is, I would say, especially in the four-wheelers, there is some distance to go, if I have to put it that way, when it comes to your product itself, because still a comparable vehicle and an electric vehicle, if I look at, there is a difference of 30 to 40% price. And that I would say is a big prohibitive factor if I look at it. Then, of course, lack of ubiquitous charging infrastructure is also a very big factor that prevents that from happening. And of course, there is still a debate upon the published range and what the actual range comes out. And because of which the drivers have to, there is not much clarity in their minds. So I would say, of course, the secondary market, the financing ecosystem, all of those are there. But then these three become the primary factors that I would say the lack of which has actually kind of not allowed the whole ecosystem to flourish in a manner that we would have expected. And till the time that happens, I would say we are still some distance from a mass adoption of the electric vehicles in India.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah. So I think the financiers is also one interesting aspect. Even with our conversations with multiple financiers, NBFCs, etc., as an asset class, they don't really understand how the battery works, how long is it going to take to write off the asset, what's the depreciation mechanics, and so on and so forth. So it does become a challenge in terms of taking a portfolio view from a purely underwriting perspective. So pretty much agreed there. Moving on to Akash. So Akash, Zip Electric also is at the forefront of electric mobility, and considering the last mile challenge that your organization is trying to address, how do you view this in terms of what more can ecosystem players do, and how can electric vehicles increase their penetration?
Sure, Harsh. So yeah, I mean, I mean, we are a 3.5, almost 4-year-old startup now. I mean, when we started solving this challenge of last mile delivery with our passion to solve pollution, there were umpteen challenges. In fact, to find out who would be the right OEM, what would be the right vehicle, were the first challenges that we started with, right? And then which battery to use, which chemistry, and how to charge it, how to put up the swapping infrastructure, right? Those were the things that we started with. Obviously, there was demand, which is always there. I mean, there's an intent for everyone to go electric. I mean, recently we saw Zomato putting a great highlight that they want to go 100% electric by 2030, right? So those are great signs of electrification for fleet as well as for logistics players. But at the same time, the challenges are all that a startup is there to solve for, right? So we saw financing as one major challenge, and then we created a platform where people could invest in an electric vehicle and they could get a rental out of it, right? So about 2.5 years back, when we wanted to deploy 200, 300 vehicles, and we didn't have enough capital to buy vehicles, we launched a platform, and then we saw a great response there, right? Then when it talk about adoption from riders, that's another problem that we started solving by finding people who don't have a bike, giving them an opportunity to earn, giving them some consistent earnings, right? So those are things that happen. But yes, still there are, I would say, bunch of things that are required to again, and I see that happening over the next 2 to 3 years, infrastructure is going to play a very, very strong role, right? How we can have batteries everywhere, how the compatibility of batteries are going to work between different OEMs, how the charging standards to be standardized between, all the OEMs, because some have a different charger, some have a different, point pin. The batteries don't work between the different vehicles. Those are things that are still to be solved. We mostly are doing two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which are smaller vehicles. We are not into cars yet, but yes, I mean, those are challenges that are still solvable, right? On the cars, there are a lot of other companies who are trying to work. And what we feel is that, if there's an intent for any company to go electric, I mean, we are trying to act as a bridge between that OEM and the company which is wanting to electrify themselves. And then we take all the load of financing, the vehicle, the swapping, the infra. We do all of that as of now.
Understood. Thank you. Yeah, so I agree. I think the whole four-wheeler story is quite complex also, because the capex involved and the model works on asset turnover. So how the asset utilization sort of can be increased. Hopefully for smaller form factors like two-wheelers, it should be easier from asset rotation perspective. And coming on the asset light model, moving on to Irfan. So e-bike go, I understand it's a two-wheeler and then subscription added to it. So that's a very interesting concept. We as Indians are still sort of figuring out fractional ownership, subscription, shared mobility kind of models. So this is a very interesting juncture to be at. What are your thoughts about how this is panning out with your customers? I'm assuming many of them would be millennials. So there would be a lot of green sort of focus. But is there actual business sort of money to be made here, or is this a lot of greenwashing happening, at least in the space, or are you seeing a lot of traction happening on market side as well?
Absolutely. Thanks, Harsha. So actually, in 6 months, we deployed almost 2,400 vehicles, even though it's pandemic. So our major customers are like Akash and other logistics companies who's taking this vehicle and working for last mile deliveries. So having said that, so in 30% people are like millennials, where they are taking this vehicle for monthly subscription. So what at eBike, what we are providing as an ecosystem, we don't just subscribe the vehicle. We give all ecosystem help in terms of like swapping, charging, service, all together. But you have to see here in Indian EV context in two-wheeler, so it's like a mirage in terms of the high speed and low speed vehicles per se. So our 90% fleet are low speed, but we are preparing to get that high speed, but it's not happening somehow, because in terms of quality, in terms of dependency on China, all those will come. So actually, we need some sort of government support, in terms of getting those real high-speed vehicle for the low cost without battery. If you're going to buy the scooter, a high-speed vehicle, so you will get 5% GST. At the same time, you will get the government subsidy, all those things. But whenever a fleet like us want to get this high-speed vehicle without battery, so when some subscription is happening out there, but the challenge is like we may lose sort of government subsidies, as well as the GST part is like when you get this vehicle without battery, so it's come somewhere around 18% if you take along with the battery. So it's come 5%. All those things has to be changed. So eventually then only the penetration will happen. So at least for us, like we are deploying this vehicle, as you said, like it's right now it's a greenwash, but in future we are stopping where people are not going to purchase those EVs. Actually, they can come on our website and they can subscribe for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months down the line.
Understood. Right. So, of course, government regulations, any such conversation is incomplete without the mention of PMP, PLI, FAME2, these kind of schemes. We have seen this in bits and pieces panning out, especially on PLI side. There is a lot of action, at least in the news that we hear. Hope that pans out well amongst all the value chain players. So talking about value chain players, that brings us to energy companies, discoms, and charging infrastructure providers. So just moving on to Sandeep here. So Tata Power has been at the forefront of setting up electric mobility infrastructure, and probably kind of conglomerate strength that Tata brings, whether it's batteries, whether it's charging stations, and so on and so forth, and including form factors. We've seen Tata Group committing a lot to green mobility. And particularly, I wanted to take your views on the two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler different configs for charging stations. How's that panning out, and how are you guys gearing up for that?
Okay, great. Thank you, Harsh, and thank you for getting me on this panel amongst all the luminaries around. Thank you once again. So Tata Power, as you rightly mentioned, we would like to believe that we are at the forefront of enabling the charging ecosystem to kickstart or sort of as a pun to push the electric mobility ecosystem, whether it is two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, buses, even all of that. And as you would know, Tata Power being a 100-year-old utility, I think it was very logical for us to foray into the electric vehicle charging business. And we are doing it in an end-to-end manner, in which starting from two-wheelers to buses. So we are spanning the entire, I would say, segment base. Two-wheeler, I think there is a fundamental difference between how this is done. I was hearing the presentation from the here gentleman about the location identifying and all of that. So I think fundamentally two-wheeler operates in a virtual chain. There is a radius that is attached, and they are largely city-centric. They have a catchment area, so they are good enough for moving within the city, and they have this daily range of, let's say, 50, 60, 100. The intent of the person to drive. I'm not saying the range of the scooter or the specifications. So it's good enough for the day. But when you go to four-wheeler, I think it's an entirely different ballgame, which is highway charging. You need rapid chargers. There is a bit of background expertise required on the grid side. And then when you get onto the top, which is the high end of which is the buses, that's where the entire ecosystem of Tata Power, or let's say Discom expertise, comes into play. So you got like HT, LT, and those kind of things. So, but having said that, I think we are playing this entire ecosystem, and I would say that in the width also, and as well as in the depth. When I say depth, we are also investing in a very, very strong digital platform that will enable all the charging infrastructure requirements, whether it is scooter or the swapping infrastructure or the cars. And I would just want to say this, that we have put up about 500 plus odd chargers, some of which are two-wheeler specific chargers, but and we want to do much more. I think the big thing that that the people in the ecosystem are all here. Broadly, I would say that there are three C's. I call them three C's, in which we need some working together. The first one being consistency. When I say consistency, there is some consistency in form factor, consistency in standards. This gun versus the other gun, this connector versus the other connector. So this is a bit of a consistency part. Consistency also in respect of the state policies. So you move from Maharashtra state to Gujarat state to Madhya Pradesh to Delhi, you will find policies which, by the time you reach Delhi, you will realize you have already forgotten the first policy. So it is quite, while all of them are very good, but there is some bit of a consistency that is desirable for clarity in the minds of the consumer as well as for the rollout partner. This is a consistency part of it. The second thing is the collaboration. We need a collaboration of the government agencies, of the discoms. So we are a discom in about 3 or 4 states. There is other discoms which need to actively participate. The OEMs, the gentleman Akash was talking about the collaboration piece. Abhilek was talking. So I think broadly we need a active collaboration between the OEMs, the charge point operators, the real estate owners, the government agencies, the state bodies. So those kind of things, collaboration piece. And the third piece, I think this game is all about customers. So end of the day, while doing all of these things, somewhere customer should not be forgotten, and we have to ensure an absolute top of the line customer experience to ensure that every time he goes to a charger, instinctively his charger is always functional. He is always able to power it up. He is always able to charge it. He is always able to pay for it. So I think, and that's where, at Tata Power, we are not, installing a charger is relatively easy, it's just a piece of hardware, you install it there. So what we are doing is central monitoring, the platform-based tracking, ensuring the charges are always up and running, multiple payment options. So those are the things. So three things: consistency, collaboration, and customer. That's broadly summing it in the way we would want to look at the ecosystem.
Sure. Nicely put. Thanks, Sandeep, for your views. I agree. It has to be well structured. So moving on to Andre. So thank you first of all for the presentation. It was great hearing from Here Technologies. So I'm just gonna take a leaf out of the Here playbook to say there's been a lot of international success that you all have seen, and in that sense, what are some of the lessons for Indian markets, and therefore what are some of the low-hanging fruits which are or some of your solutions which are immediately deployable for India ecosystems?
Thank you, Harsh. Thank you also for the invite and for the opportunity to be part of this lively discussion. Very interesting with lots of esteemed speakers. So also we appreciate to be part of this. To answer your question, if we're looking, let's say, at the global level, I would say that when it comes to adoption, basically adoption, well, the barrier to adoption is basically fueled from mainly two elements. One is the lack of experience of users with EV. So it's a new technology, people have a steep learning curve, and in most of the cases, they do not have the chance to experience this. So this also might happen in terms of behavior. I think most of the users, being personal drivers or professional drivers, they tend to overestimate what the range requirement is. But of course, only when you start using an EV, then it's when you kind of like see how it fits your lifestyle, and then it calibrates to your need. So talking about what you said about kind of like best practices, what we've seen, in the most advanced markets in the world in terms of adoption, if you look at countries like Norway and Netherlands, they've made it actually very simple for people to access EVs. So from that perspective, you as a private user, you get a good subsidy. Businesses would get subsidies as well to operate with EV. Even, we were earlier talking about the case of Uber. Actually, they started with the taxis, right? It was very affordable for taxi drivers and for ride-hailing to start with this. And they're also offering, this experience to the passengers, right? Because once you are riding in an EV, you might find it actually better or more, let's say, pleasant. And it's true kind of what they say. Once you have experienced an EV, you might not go back to combustion. So that's, I would say, the first takeaway and the first learning. But the second, there's also the thing around the infrastructure. So I think if there would be, if everyone would actually have access to EV charging or battery swapping, we actually wouldn't be discussing range anxiety, or we wouldn't be discussing, this barrier to adoption. But that's actually not achievable. So I don't think any country could say, okay, if every parking spot would have a charging and every corner would have a battery swapper. We're probably not going to get anywhere with this. So what could be done is actually to provide better visibility regarding where are the charging stations, what's the availability, also what are the payment mechanisms. So how do you get there? How do you pay, and how quickly, let's say, you can be on the road again? Are actually also quite key elements of this experience.
Understood. Thanks for sharing. And finally, moving on to squad leader Prerna. So I was just going to talk about how the infrastructure and the form factors can pan out. And then at Evolet, there is probably, you have one of the most diverse portfolio ranging from quad bikes to buses to two-wheelers. So how's the uptake been, at what form factors, and some of your learnings from there on how this is panning out for you, especially at the organization?
Thank you very much, Harshvardhan. When I look at it from an OEM's perspective, I see that this perspective will have two different classes of vision. One that would come from the likes of, let's say, Sandeep, which is a larger organized sector, which is also looking at a long-term pan out and long-term effects and stability perspective of the OEM's vision. The other perspective of the OEM's vision would come from the likes of Evolet, which are the startup minded. So these are the startup minded people who would gel much more with the small scale fleet operators who are willing to do a POC, who are still trying to figure out what works for them in which part of the country and how will that shape up. And I completely agree with what Akash was trying to bring to the table, that it will have to be a collaborative model. It would not be just OEM driven, that I designed this and I feel that this is going to get the best cost to benefit ratio and I push it to the throat and I just dump it on the roads. No, that's not how it's going to be. The inputs that Akash would be able to give it to me, possibly in terms of his interest as a fleet operator, could differ from what Abhilek would offer to us. And at this point in time, as an OEM, we would have to be very receptive of all the inputs which would come from the market. As a small startup OEM, perhaps we would be able to weave those inputs at a very fast pace and turn around a product maybe in 3 months' time and give them a POC. Whilst an OEM of the size of the magnitude what Sandeep can bring to the table would be able to give that sustainability and a product development which will have a much higher uptime. A service which is going to be available pan-India across, and these would be the, I would say, the denominators which would define what would the market accept. So perhaps there's a product which we have developed which is very high in acceptance in a retail segment across my dealership outlets, which would also be pan-India. But the uptime on those products, maintaining that is a different ball game than maintaining an uptime for a fleet operator. Now, I also come from a feedback that I get from many fleet operators that when they designed a fleet, let's say a broad example of, let's say, Domino's. When they designed their entire business plan, they did not think of fitting in a charging station or a swapping network within that place. So they were only looking at making food, keeping a pantry for a quick dispatch, and a fleet which would deliver in 30 minutes time. No, you did not consider it as a part of your CapEx or an OpEx or a part of your just physical infrastructure to be able to fit in a charging station and an infra and a place to park the bikes and cater to that time of the charging time. Even if it's not the charging time, you're looking at the time of opening the boot, removing the battery, putting into a swapping station, fitting another one there. It was not part of the plan. So whilst they are also struggling to change their plan, they would possibly do a POC in a small pocket. People like us as startups can always fit in at a click and turn something around in a week's time. All right, take it. Do you like it? If you like it, well, I can scale up this much in this much time and this much in this much time. But perhaps if you're looking at pan-India operation within a year, perhaps you'll have to look at an OEM of a larger magnitude, right? This is the kind of feedback that we received from so many OEMs, and that brought us to doing, I must share this with you. It's a very important day for us. I spent my entire day since morning at the plant, and we have pushed out a first consignment of a commercially designed two-wheeler. all designed for about 350 to 400 kgs of a payload carrying capacity, not only in terms of load, in terms of weight, but also in terms of volume. So I'm not only looking at a institutionalized commercial usage, I'm also looking at a small size pocket of a retail user, somebody like who is a fairy wala, papad wala, kapde bechne wala, somebody like that. Jo pan India uptime nahi dhoond raha hai. He's looking at a pan India uptime maybe just in South Delhi. A pan India or a uptime or a serviceability, repair and a warranty facility somewhere in South Delhi, somewhere in Trans Yamuna, somewhere in Chandni Chowk, somewhere in Firozabad, somewhere in Muzaffarnagar, somewhere in Bihar, somewhere in Chhapra, Bareilly, somewhere there, you're getting me the kind of pockets I'm looking at. And they are not looking at a lacquer coated piece which I want to sell in my retail outlet. No, they're looking at something जिसको गड्ढे में गिरा दो और वो टूटना नहीं चाहिए. They're looking at something कि 45 की स्पीड पर चलता है ठीक है, लेकिन 5 लोग बैठ सकते हैं कि नहीं. So the requirement from that product and their expectations are way too high. They're just way too high. And when they start to compare, they also want everything filled in one product. 100 kilometer chalta hai ki nahi? Despite the fact that the entire city limit would finish in 10 kilometers, they still want a 100-kilometer range. If it's a 2-seater, they definitely want to try it with 4 people sitting on it, just to see when will that fail and how will that fail. And that is the kind of product that you have to design for your customer. And I fully go with the fleet operators because they have the capability to do a fantastic POC. So the kind of product that I give out, they are the ones who will be able to train their user, and they are the first movers on the ground, which a retail buyer would take a look at it and say, all right, this is how it behaves, and this is the reliability. Yes, it does charge and it does work and it does cross a flyover with 3 people sitting on it or 2 people sitting on it. It does cross a flyover. It did cross a flyover with 2 people sitting on it and with 20 kgs of potato sacks. It did cross a flyover, and then they would feel, हाँ, अगर Uber वाला और या Zip वाली वो गाड़ी पर जा रहे हैं और वो cross करता है, fair enough. So when I take it home, it will serve my purpose too. So I do feel, yes, the larger feedback from the market will come from fleet operators, but the kind of inputs that I get from retail users, wow, it's a fantastic thing. They all want everything put together, and it still has to look like a BMW, and which should fit in a 50,000 rupee price, which is lesser than the regular 2-wheeler they are using right now. So they want the capex to be lower. OPEX definitely is lower, and they tend to believe it only after they've used it for a month. But the moment they see that same product being used by a fleet operator, their faith sort of quadruples. And then they come back asking for more. And of course, the design and the features and the price points that they have in their minds is something else. Whilst that of a fleet operator, it's something else. So it could be the same product, the same chassis, that's the same product specification, speed range, but the product that will go out of the shop floor is going to be different for a fleet operator and something. And yes, what a fleet operator uses, almost everybody sees that these guys are using it on a phone and they are able to monitor it, and like it's like a big wow factor. A retail user also wants all that put together in a segment. And somehow I feel that it's the 2-wheelers and the 3-wheelers which are going to be the drivers of this game change. Because the customer is much more receptive, the capex is lower, and that's where the entire bottom line is. That's my feeling. The investment and the risk, what they see as a risk of investment is very, very low compared to a 4-wheeler. Once they build the faith in a product, even an institutional user as well as a retail user, their tendency to place faith on a 4-wheeler and a larger bus fleet is going to be much, much better.
Sure. Thank you, Squad Leader Prerna. I think it was quite insightful, and I completely agree. The white space which exists, because for OEMs it's difficult to manage the scale for them to have platforms developed and manage it across APAC and other geographies. This is sometimes a challenge, and that's where startups do indeed wonders when they address micro markets, especially the last mile challenges that you mentioned. Pretty much on point. Looks like you found a sweet spot, and hopefully should pan out for you. Going back to Rohit. Rohit, do we wanna take a poll here?
Yeah, of course we can do a poll. Let me know which question you wanna ask the audience.
Yeah, I think we can start with one.
Sure.
So, yeah,
Harsh, maybe you can read out the question, and once you've done that, we can move on to the discussion.
Absolutely. For the viewers, you would be seeing, what do you think is the key challenge in the mind of consumers while buying the EV? Unfortunately, these are all not new challenges, but been there since donkey's years. Do let us know what do you think is most relevant, and if all of them, then probably that's the option.
Sure, Harsh. Maybe you can move on to the next question. I'll share the results when they come.
Sure. All right. So moving on to another interesting element about business model. So we have seen the business. I mean, we've spoken about technology, about retail adoption, but at the end of it, it has to make financial sense. And industry players are in fact adjusting their business models to address range anxiety. EV players are conducting pilot studies, POCs for deployment. So is there a single size which fits all? And if no, what does it mean for the larger industry? What is the right business model, and how various organizations are securing their profit lines for this? So maybe we can follow the same order what we had earlier. Abhilek, over to you. So I know Uber, there is a lot of emphasis on revenue management, and rightly so. I think as an organization, it should be imperative. Therefore, how EV sort of pans out here? Over to you, Akhilesh.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at revenue, like there are few things we look at it from an investment perspective, because we believe in it, and we do believe in electric mobility. As an organization, that's the point. But if you look at viability point of view, then whether it is a driver or an individual, the way we think, or anybody should think about it, we just think from that person's P&L. I mean, he must be having his own P&L in the mind. Does it work for him or not? I think that's going to be a very important barometer. Like a decision about, let's say, as an organization, if we have to take a call that whether we want to put our weight behind this particular idea at this point of time or not, would squarely be dependent on how do we see the entire ecosystem panning out in the next year or so. And if there is going to be a material movement, or if there is going to be a step change in the next 1 year or so, then it makes sense for you to actually go ahead and put your weight behind it and then move forward. And we do that from time to time. Like, for example, we have done quite a few small scale pilots wherein we have worked with multiple partners to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And interestingly, the question that you asked, the answer that came through was all of the above. It was not one or the other. So I would say that it's not so much of a revenue management for us, but it's about the readiness of the ecosystem overall.
Understood. And also, just a follow-on question to that is about, we saw the two-wheelers and three-wheelers leading the EV adoption. Is there going to be some initiative on that front as well, especially on goods or commercial space? Maybe a spin-off or something?
So when we say three-wheelers, there are two parts to it. One is the passenger, and the other is the commercial. And even in passenger, there are normally people use three-wheelers. They include the e-rickshaws also. But if we bifurcate e-rickshaws and e-autos within this segment, then the story is very different. E-auto is actually very, very, very nascent, if I have to put it that way. If there are 350,000 of them selling in the year, barely 500 to 600 actually is e-autos on the passenger side. So that is a very different story. Commercial side, commercial side also, the adoption would be, primarily driven to begin with by the corporate side of it. For example, let's say an Amazon or a Flipkart, they want to have their fleet and they want to move towards a goal of sustainability because all the organizations want to move that route. So they will be the ones taking that lead because they can afford to pay that extra premium that is actually required in those kind of vehicles. So I would say net two-wheelers and three-wheelers, while they are driving adoption, but that needs to be seen in the context of EV. But when we see in the context of overall ecosystem and the market, for example, if you see the overall two-wheeler and three-wheeler market and then see if that adoption is being driven, then the story is still, I would say, in the formative stages at this point of time. So yes, they are driving adoption, but in a limited context of electric mobility.
Understood. Sure. Thank you. Moving on to Irfan. So talking about viability and breaking even, most startups have this at the back of the mind. We've seen immense pressure on founders on how to be profitable, not go to the cash burn sort of story. Any thoughts on how this is panning out for EV startups and your own learnings from there?
Yeah, so we built a platform where anybody can come and get those vehicles from recommended OEM and deploy in a platform. So in that way, actually, we become asset light. So for that reason, actually, we expand so fast. So adding, as I said earlier, so adding 3,000 plus vehicles in 1 year. So in that, actually, customer is the king. So if you take care of the customer, so in terms of providing services at the same time, in my customer portfolio, there are like more B2B2C than B2C or B2B. When I say B2B2C, those who are working for Amazon, Flipkart, Swiggy, Zomato, so on and so forth, those guys has to come on the platform and take this vehicle. So for them, actually, it's a plain and simple, daily commute cost. When you put that TCO, so the total cost of ownership for petrol two-wheeler is like much high. So in our platform, we are able to provide them like 3,600 rupees monthly subscription for EV, which includes all the charging, swapping, so on. So they immediately compare. When I start this startup for B2C, so eventually I end up with B2B because the adoption is happening in terms of business. So many companies like Amazon are adapted and Big Basket are adapted vehicle where they are taking bulk leasing and deploy this vehicle in the delivery fleet. At the same time, like delivery executive also, they are redirect to us and they are also coming and taking this vehicle from us. Go. At the same time, what we are doing, like we are not renting this vehicle for 1 day or 2 days because the turnaround time, the occupancy and the inventory management is very difficult. So we are renting this vehicle for, long term, like who can't own this vehicle, they will definitely come our platform, take this vehicle for, as long as 2 years to 3 years or so. So you can rent to own also from our model. So in that, actually, we'll break even in 18 months. So, renting this vehicle for 3,600 to 4,500. So eventually we are making profit. So we are curtailed that burn as of now in terms of giving this vehicle as a subscription.
Correct. Makes sense. Yeah. So I think as long as it's asset light and as long as OPECO and TCO is taken care, should be fine. I think it's about adoption and scale, especially from a business viability point of view. So completely in agreement. Moving on, the same question with you, Sandeep, in terms of the ecosystem enablers. I'm sure the struggle is even more compounded because it has to be from a service level perspective very well entailed, and at the same time CX has to be on point. So any thoughts on that, how how this balances viability and business model realignment therefore? Sorry, you're on mute in case you're saying something.
Sorry. So the business model question is actually the question that my boss also keeps asking me, but we don't have an answer really for the moment. But see, look at it this way. I think I go back to a lot of these emerging businesses, which uh, let's say telecom, way back 20 years back, was an emerging business. That time the prices were very high, the spread was very low, and everybody believed that India would have, at 16 rupees 80 paisa per minute, India would have maximum 2 lakh users, and then that will be the end of the world. So now we have got about 400 million users, and people are making 35 to 40% EBITDA at zero price of voice. So I think India is a very much volume game, right? Today, we don't have volumes. We have got very few vehicles, but that's about to change. And you are the people who are about to change that, and we are the people who are possibly going to enable that change. So the traditional business models that apply world over do not work in India. And Harsh, you have studied those. You know that very, very clearly. Having said that, the Indian consumer is going to take up everything as long as a good customer experience is offered and a good product is offered. You cannot offer him a suboptimal product and offer it at a low price just so that you get the volumes. It won't work. And we have seen this across industry everywhere. So this is exactly the place that people like us who have, I would say, resilience for the long play and for the long haul are there to enable, catalyze, as well as to sort of evangelize this ecosystem. Uh, Very simply, I think I just mentioned about the customer experience piece. How many charge point operators globally, I'm not even saying in India, globally, have a 24 hours contact center helpline? You won't find that, right? Uh, uh, you've got web support, you've got online chat support, and all of those things. Now, those are the kind of things that are pretty heavy in terms of cost. But I think as a long haul player, uh, our company, we are very, very keen to participate in this growth and in a way commit ourselves to evolving this ecosystem. The customer experience part, the awareness part. I think today these days, most of our investment, I would say, investment is in terms of time, goes in making the customers aware about what is the electric vehicle, what is an electric scooter, what are the benefits, what are the chargings. Most customers don't even know that there is a home charger that is available with cars, right? Now this is something that once you say that to them, it's a I was seeing a study in the UK. It is just as of yesterday, and this is UK, mind you. They are slightly ahead of us, in fact significantly ahead of us in the curve. About 62% of them, 62% of them, including owners, were not aware that your car can go from 15% to 80% charge in less than 1 hour, including owners. So now I think this is exactly the space that we are to residential societies to just make presentations about the electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging. And we keep getting asked a lot of questions from a Sunday motley crowd saying that, what is the cost per kilometer, how much does it go, and all of those. But we are willing to invest that kind of time and energy and effort. So the two parts to your question, I think we are spending a lot of effort in educating, creating awareness. And the second, consumer experience part of it is something that inherently is what we want to invest on. Business models will follow today, not tomorrow, but I think it's an output of these two and not really an input that goes into the structure.
Understood. Thanks for that insight. I'm also just gonna flip the question a little bit to Andre. So the India playbook will have different parameters than probably it'll have globally, and therefore, in order to be relevant in Indian markets from a P&L perspective as well, are there any particular learnings which you would want to share, or how's that going to pan out? Any thoughts for hair technologies, especially?
Yeah, indeed, that's actually a very good question. And from our perspective, every market itself has its own particularity, right? I would say that in the case of India, there's actually maybe a lot of benefit to using urban areas for two-wheelers, three-wheelers. I think from that perspective, the battery and the technology actually might fit the requirement needs and the range needs in the market. While in other places, maybe, EVs are already used on the highways for driving long distance. So from that perspective, it's all about kind of like, the cost versus the benefit. What's actually required and what's actually the market ready to step in. Maybe, when it comes to long range EVs might be just a small portion of the market, but then kind of like the urban EVs, the urban deliveries, this is actually where the market would go really fast. And this is actually where there's a business case, because the technology doesn't have to be that expensive, but the benefits in terms of operational cost and also in terms of society benefits, like reducing pollution and might just actually work. And there's actually no secret, right? Even for four-wheelers, there's always the question about the range and how far you can go, but actually utilizing them in an urban environment where maybe the speed is not very high, where there's some traffic in, you would actually do better than what the OEMs would be claiming in terms of range. While once you go on the highway, this is where, this is actually the range killer everywhere. So that's why I'm kind of, let's say, seeing that, for India, there will be a lot of benefits to do this in the urban environments in the first phase, and then get it electrified and get the benefits for the people living in the city and the fleet operators and the users. And then maybe the kind of like the second step outside of it, which might be maybe something that, in other countries, in other parts of the world might not happen like that, right? They would not start with small, or actually, maybe they would, right? Because even in other places, these e-scooters are actually popping up everywhere for sharing, but probably less for, how should I say, for delivery or for transportation. So I think at the end, each market would kind of like find its own pace and find the applicability of the technology in a way that's favorable for them, rather than seeing it kind of like a one size fits all. Even I would say that even in the same country, you cannot apply one size fits all. And I think even for users, there will be individual needs where one technology or other might be meeting better than the next technology.
Sure, understood. And then finally, coming to squadron leader Prerna. So particularly for OEMs who are trying to be profitable, the EV space can be quite challenging. We heard from various panelists on the combinations and permutations we've tried on subscription, on B2B, B2C, etc. Any learnings from how, and first of all, congratulations, by the way, for the rollout that you mentioned. I think it's an interesting conjuncture where where regulator is headed. But at the same time, I'm sure if you don your entrepreneur hat, profitability is definitely somewhere in the back of mind always. And any thoughts on how that's going to pan out and how mission critical it is for unit?
Prerna, are you able to hear
Am I
us?
audible?
Yeah, yes.
Yes. Am I audible now? I think there was some internet fluctuation. So primarily, I missed out the last sentence, what you said, I think. And you said congratulations on the rollout, and thereafter it just...
I said as an entrepreneur, I'm sure profitability is of very high importance. As an aviator, I'm sure it's mission critical for you. So do share some thoughts.
Sure. And you rightly said that as Fauji's and aviators, we are known to be on a mission mode. We are known to be working on a SOP model almost all the time. And like you rightly said, none of the SOPs work. None. The moment we start looking at any model which was working somewhere else, I pull it out and try and bring it back here. It just stops to work. And then you end up micromanaging everything from the boardroom till the time the customer is holding that scooter in his hands. No matter how hard we try, possibly it also comes from a startup perspective, that this is how the startup is. And that's the beauty of being in a startup, that you're hand holding the mission, not only from the boardroom perspective, but also from a user's perspective, and trying to translate the story without any miscommunication in the gap or no gaps in the story till the last mile. So this is the last mile delivery of a startup story. But I sincerely feel the reason why we are looking at India in the entire EV ecosystem is because this is where we can churn out volumes. And this has been the biggest learning of our business plan. I was speaking to somebody who was very, very senior in the automobile industry, and they had decades of work behind them in this industry. And they were looking at me with consideration that you coming from an aerospace and defense background, we were just trying to share notes as to this is how it used to work there, but what do you think? This is how we are going. And no matter how headstrong we are and we want to be, you really have to remain practical at all times. So where are we? We were just exchanging notes, and we said, this is how my gut feel is, and this is how we've reached in terms of defining what we want. This is what we want, and we are able to define the whys and the hows. I said, well, if in a 1.5 years time, if you guys have been able to define it, you guys are doing fantastic. I said, really? I thought it has taken us about 1.5 years to get there. Come on, have a heart. We needed these answers at the part of the business plan before you started to roll out, didn't we? And we thought that we were lagging behind 1.5 years, and they said, sorry, you're ahead of the curve by about 2 years. Because you, in 1.5 years, if you already know what to do and how, in a landscape like that of India, you've already achieved half the aim. I did not believe it for 6 months after I heard that story. Trust me, because I thought it was just a passing compliment for a startup. I said, all right, good show, shabash, and go on. No, it took me 6 months to realize what they said was quite true. Whatever works in Delhi, it did not work in Mathura. Whatever worked for Bangalore did not work for Mumbai. So we know that there are business plan changes, not only at the macro, but also at the micro level, which are needed, which needed to be tweaked, not only in terms of product design, but also in terms of the ATLs and the BTLs that we were doing. And just the fact that I think what got us the answers so fast, that we were getting a very, very fast and a constant feedback from our users. And I still feel when I connect with a lot of people, how would the numbers be? And how would I try to be on, how can I stay on the green despite the business plans, and can we still stick there? It has gone off the scale at least 4 times in last 1 year, at least 4 times. And by the time I'm able to do a course correction and come back on track, the track has already gone somewhere else. That's how fluid the situation is. And it is coming from a pure aviator's parlance, that we feel that if you're able to take a long distant vision, if you're able to look at the horizon, just keep going, you possibly will not take too much of a detour or take a dogleg and come back on track. We've been trying to apply the same formula, but we realize the track is changing so damn fast. It's just that the only one thing constant that again I've derived from my personal experience, we got to keep the horizon constant. Just keep the horizon constant. All short-term aims may not match, but all the long-term aims are matching. And when they start to match, they are matching much more than our expectations. This is again coming from my personal experience in this small time, in this domain. Whatever the scale of operation as a startup we had thought in 2019 when we rolled out, we had to reschedule and reshape after the Auto Expo last year, and again rescaled, considering that it would be COVID and something else, we rescaled and reached somewhere else, which is a good side of the problem, but nonetheless problem it is. Even if it is on the good side, the problem it is. The best part is when you are able to get little more clarity on how it is defining, it will all start to make sense. I'm convinced that the numbers will all start to make sense, and they will make much more sense than we planned them to be, just by virtue of the kind of volumes we have here. Just by virtue of volumes. If I were to do something like this in a smaller country, like if I were looking at Bangladesh or Malaysia or even New Zealand for that matter, I wouldn't have been able to change my plan with such great versatility or with such great faith. And in this, when there's a vacuum and when the customer really wants it, when there's OpEx is something which is tearing all of them. And our client is just looking at saving money at that point. I'm sure once that faith is achieved, it's just that very, very little block of faith. I'm sure the numbers that we plan are all going to be beyond green if there's something like that that exists.
Agree. Thank you so much. And thanks for bringing in your personal perspectives as an aviator. I think probably the closest I can talk about the EV ecosystem being is what the after pilots call a whiteout, especially at higher altitudes, where it's difficult to sort of find the bearings. And especially now with COVID, this is probably the fog of war, which we will have to all navigate through as ecosystem players. So with that, I'll stop the discussion here and request Rohit for Q&A from our audience as well.
Sure. So I'm going to just share the results for the poll that we did, so the audience can have a look. And in the meantime, Harsh, you and I can maybe look through the Q&A. I can start with a few questions, and then you can ask. Okay.
Sure. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so when we look at the Q&A, there are a few themes that keep repeating themselves. So one key question or theme that is quite constant is that when it comes to battery, what about the reuse, recycling, and managing the end of life for the battery? Are we replacing pollution in the air by sort of pushing it into the ground? So what are the thoughts of the panel on that? When it comes to lithium, the battery recycling and reuse. Would one of you like to take that? Sandeep, yeah, why not?
Yeah, so I think most of us know that the battery in an electric vehicle has a far more stringent requirement of performance than the same battery outside, which means there is a concept of second life of battery. So once the battery is retired from the vehicle, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, whatever that is, it has got, which also it takes about 8 to 10 years, because most of the vehicles are offering about 8 years warranty on the battery and everything. So let us say about 8 to 10 years after the useful life of battery inside a vehicle, it can be very clearly used by power utilities like us to give it a quote-unquote second lease of life, as I would call it. And that has got various uses, behind the meter applications, ahead of the meter applications, solar storage, microgrids, power balancer.
Yes.
There are multiple utilities, multiple uses of that battery, till maybe much further. And even then, I think to say that it will be buried into the ground is not a fair comment. I think there is a lot of work that the government is also doing to recycle those batteries and extract the precious metals or the chemistries and segregate those to actually put it back into circulation. So I think there is a whole ecosystem of battery chemistries, battery experts working in that direction. So first life inside the vehicle, second life outside the vehicle, which is the people like us who can use it extensively for a longer period. And even after it has been used, it does not go into landfills. It can go into proper recycling and then comes back into circulation. So I think that system is getting better and better every day. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Understood. Thank you.
So,
in fact, we also did a fair bit of work on that, Rohit. Let me add to Sandeep's perspective here. Let me know if my screen's visible.
Yeah.
Yes. So as Sandeep rightly mentioned, there is juice left in the battery after its use as well. And we have seen the EV battery value chain right from raw material extraction to disposal. It should not and does not go to the landfill. There are a lot of initiatives going on, including some by Tata Group on the battery second life. The cases of energy storage, OEMs have been using them for earth moving equipment, for forklifts, etc. Those are some use cases. Also in India, there are organizations who are working in tandem on this. Organizations like Atero and Exigo have set up charging stations, have set up recycling facilities, and the likes of Toyota Susho also have invested. So this is just a snapshot. Happy to go through it in detail with the viewers in case anyone's interested. But the point being that I think as mobility players, we are responsible for ethical disposal of these batteries, and under no circumstance these are to be discarded. There is enough use for them after their first use.
Sure.
Over to you, Rohit.
Sure. Okay. So moving on to the next question, it's either Andre Kuhn or Andre Yordake can answer this one. So this was asked during your presentation that has your solution been implemented for a fixed route ride hailing use case? Is that something where your solution has been implemented? This was from a gentleman by the name of Mr. Ravindra Mohan.
Yeah, thank you, Rohit. I'll take that question. So the question was, they're talking about the fixed route and the routing parameters, right?
Yeah, the ride-hailing use case has it been used for?
Cases, yeah. Actually, what you've been seeing, what Andre was showing in the presentation, the multi-stop routing actually comes exactly as a product, even for ride-hailing, even if you don't have the EV element into it. So think about the multi-stop routing, something that you can also program if you have like a combustion vehicle, or just to plan where you have to stop and pick up either parcels or passengers. But now with the EV, you can also add the parameters where you can actually charge if you need to. If you need to kind of like middle of the route or between jobs, if you need to plan a top up of the battery, this is also computed part of the multi-stop routing. So from that perspective, it's actually quite let's say a useful feature both for the ride hailing, but we're also seeing this being used, even for private users, like kind of like OEMs for passenger cars, because sometimes it happens if you're driving, let's say, longer, you might not be able to get from A to B without charging, or maybe 2 charging breaks in between. And this is kind of like computed from the beginning to make sure that you are reaching your destination and you're also taking the most optimal charging breaks. And this is kind of like the interesting thing, because sometimes, depending on where you stop at charging, maybe let's say charging sooner at a charging station that's faster is actually better than charging later at the charging station that's actually slower. So this also takes into let's say into parameters the time element. You make sure that the charging times are actually kept to a minimum for you to need it to actually reach your destination.
Okay. Great.
So indeed,
Great.
that's actually quite an important feature, and we're also seeing these part of the, let's say, the planning, because EV is all about planning. You need to, let's say, anticipate more how your range would be, where would you stop. So with location technology, we actually try to do this, let's say, in an automated fashion.
Okay, great.
Let me just add something there as well, because another part of these problems similar to ride hailing is actually the general traveling salesman problem. Also for here, there's a solution which we call vehicle routing problem solver also in the portfolio, which allows you to do that. and that can of course also be combined in general. So that's another option. So in some cases you want to have the optimal battery consumption. In others, you still want to have the fastest speed ever, or the most optimal visit for, let's say, for different parties, or think about handymen dropping over. And actually the implementation we have, it was actually launched last year, allows you also to dynamically add and remove stops from these solutions while everything is ongoing. So therefore, there might be also another aspect, and depending on the use case, you might actually don't care too much about the battery, but more about the time. It really depends.
Okay, great. And I think Harsh, we can end with one last question. You've written one to me, so maybe you can take that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rohit. So probably this can be the last question. Nevertheless, a pertinent one is, therefore, what is the lesson for EV businesses? How should they differentiate themselves given the hyper competition which we are going to see in future, if not today? What are some of the learnings in terms of differentiations in business, whether it's service levels or infra deployment, etc. Maybe some of the panelists can speak from their experience over there.
Maybe Prerna can take that one. Prerna, would you like to take that one?
Hello?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part again, the internet.
No worries. No worries. I think the question was, what is the biggest differentiator beyond vehicles for an EV business? It could be service levels, deployment, and I think Harsh mentioned a few more things.
Mostly as I see it from an OEM's perspective, it would have to be dependability. Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So it would have to be dependability on the product. No matter how best the product offers you the cost to benefit ratio, it is the dependability of the product and a sustained service network. Sustained. That is what Sandeep said is $1 million takeaway from what he said at the initial time when he started to speak. Sustenance. When the service is available 24/7 from the same spot where he had purchased this scooter. He does not have to go to a third party or depend on someone else. That one key factor is going to be the game changer. Whether it gives him a 60 kilometers or 120 is not going to matter. But if that 60 kilometers is constant and is regulated and the battery performance stays stable, that's all that they need.
Okay, great. So Harsh, can I just say the exit speech, and can we end the session?
Absolutely. Sure.
Okay, great. So thanks all for joining for today's live session on EV. I hope you enjoyed the session and found it useful for your business. All of you have been a wonderful audience, so I invite you to share your feedback in the form that opens when you exit the session. And I wanted to take this time to especially thank our speakers for taking out the time from their busy schedule for this. We really appreciate the support. I would also like to thank the wonderful audience for the inquisitiveness and all the questions. We received well over 50 questions. I'm sorry we couldn't take them all. Maybe we can do a part 2, part 3 of this. And I lastly wanted to thank our partner Here Technologies for supporting this session. Thank you all for joining us once again, and we will see you next for our upcoming sessions on the Indian auto component sector, telematics, tractor and CV industry. So please stay tuned and do join us for the scene. In the meantime, here is a bye from all of us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.